The rain tapped gently against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Cole's penthouse, a rhythmic reminder of the world outside his success. On paper, he was the embodiment of the American dream, a self-made billionaire whose groundbreaking technology had reshaped industries. His name was synonymous with innovation, his face splashed across magazine covers, his speeches drawing standing ovations from packed auditoriums. To strangers, he was unstoppable. But anyone who stepped into his private study would see a different story. The room was a fortress of grief and determination, its walls plastered with maps, faded photographs, news clippings, and handwritten notes, all connected by a web of red string. In the center, a single photograph stood framed on his desk, a girl with bright eyes and a mischievous smile. His daughter, Lily. 9 years had passed since she disappeared without a trace, 9 years since the night his world collapsed. Every business deal, every award, every celebration since then had been shadowed by an emptiness he could not outrun. He had built his empire with precision and vision, but the real blueprint guiding his life was hidden from the world, a relentless pursuit to find her. The media speculated about his absence from certain events, his frequent, unexplained travels. None guessed the truth, that behind the armor of wealth and power was a father clinging to hope, chasing whispers in the dark. For Ethan, the billions in his bank account meant nothing if he couldn't spend them on the only thing he truly wanted, to bring his little girl home. Ethan's search became a life he hadn't planned for but could never walk away from. It began with phone calls to private investigators and data analysts, but soon it pulled him far beyond boardrooms and polished city streets. He walked through the dust of Moroccan markets, scanning faces in the crowd. He knocked on weathered doors in Eastern European villages where the winters bit through his coat. He sat in cramped police stations, listening to translations of half-remembered stories from strangers who thought they'd seen a girl like Lily. Every lead held the fragile promise of an ending, and every dead end carved the loss deeper into him. Yet, somewhere along the way, the search became more than a mission, it became a thread of humanity connecting him to people he might never have known. In small towns and crowded city slums, he met children with hollow eyes who had been forgotten by the world. He paid for surgeries in rural clinics, left envelopes of money on doorsteps, funded shelters that would never know his name. It wasn't charity to him, it was something quieter, almost sacred. Each act felt like honoring Lily, as if by saving someone else's child, he was keeping her spirit close. Some nights he lay awake in cheap hotel rooms, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she could somehow feel the love he was scattering across the world. The search was exhausting, and the trail was cold, but he pressed on, driven by the same thought that had kept him going from the start: she was out there somewhere. It was in a small, wind-swept village at the edge of the Balkans that hope found him again. Ethan had arrived chasing another fragile lead, a rumor about a young woman who worked at a local orphanage, one whose features matched Lily's childhood photographs. He had learned not to let his heart race too quickly, but as the car climbed the narrow road toward the crumbling building, his hands gripped the wheel harder. Inside, the smell of wood smoke and worn blankets filled the air. Children peeked out from behind doorways, curious about the stranger in the tailored coat. Then he saw her, tall, with hair that caught the light in a way that almost hurt to look at. For a moment, the world narrowed to her face. But when she turned fully, his chest sank. It wasn't Lily. The disappointment was sharp, almost physical. Yet the young woman smiled warmly and, in hesitant English, told him something that made his pulse quicken. Years ago, a girl had stayed there who looked like the photograph Ethan showed her. She was quiet, guarded, but had left behind a single drawing when she left, a sketch of a sunset over the Golden Gate Bridge. The orphanage's director handed him the fragile, folded paper. Ethan traced the pencil lines with his thumb. It wasn't proof, but it was a breadcrumb, and it pointed somewhere he hadn't looked in years. The sun was setting when he left the village, the sky awash in the same colors Lily had once drawn. For the first time in months, he turned his car toward home. The safe house was tucked away in a quiet corner of San Francisco, its walls painted soft colors meant to suit the people who arrived there carrying unspeakable scars. Ethan had funded it years ago through an anonymous donation, never imagining it might hold the answer he'd been chasing for nearly a decade. The air was still when he stepped inside, the hum of distant laughter drifting in from a small garden out back. He followed it, each step heavy with the weight of hope and fear intertwining. In the garden, a young woman sat alone at a weathered wooden table, sketching with slow, deliberate strokes. The paper beneath her hand bloomed with the familiar image of a sunset spilling gold and crimson over the Golden Gate Bridge. For a moment, Ethan simply stood there, unable to breathe. Then she looked up. Her eyes, those same bright, mischievous eyes from the photograph on his desk, met his. The sketch slipped from her fingers. She rose slowly, as if afraid the moment might shatter if she moved too quickly. And then, without a word, she was in his arms, clinging to him with a ferocity that told the whole story of their years apart. Tears blurred the garden into shapes and colors, but Ethan didn't care. He could feel her heartbeat against his chest, fast and real, and the 9 years of empty searching collapsed into nothing. In that embrace, the world was whole again. She was home. And so was he. Months later, Ethan no longer sat in corner offices or faced flashing cameras at product launches. He had stepped away from the company entirely, trading balance sheets for something far more personal. Together with Lily, he poured his fortune into a foundation dedicated to finding and supporting missing children, creating networks of safe houses, funding search operations, and offering counseling to families who refused to give up hope. They traveled together, not chasing shadows this time, but bringing light. In city halls and small-town community centers, they spoke to parents whose eyes carried the same ache Ethan had once worn. Lily would tell her story, her voice steady but filled with quiet strength, and people would lean forward, clinging to every word. Each reunion they facilitated felt like another wound in the world stitched closed. Reporters often asked Ethan about his success, expecting him to speak of market strategies or technological breakthroughs. Instead, he would smile softly and say, "The real measure of wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you give away to bring someone home." One crisp autumn afternoon, they stood at the edge of the Golden Gate Bridge, watching the sun dip toward the horizon in a wash of gold and crimson. It was the same view Lily had once drawn from memory, the image that had led him back to her. She slipped her hand into his, and for a long time they stood in silence, the wind wrapping around them. Somewhere, another family would find their way back to each other. And that was enough.